a great opportunity for our students to hear firsthand from a convicted felon what happens when you make the wrong choice when faced with an ethical dilemma. We have a great program here on ethics and fraud, and it's a great opportunity for our students to basically take stuff that we talk about in the classroom and hear it directly from the horse's mouth, if you will.
December 6th of 2005, I was laying in bed and I couldn't go to sleep. And I just started reflecting on my entire life. I mean, going all the way back to my childhood. And I thought about, my parents and the way I was raised, and I had good parents. I didn't get beaten that often, just good folks. Stayed out of trouble for the most part. Went off to school, small school, University of North Alabama in Florence, and did pretty well there, made good grades, was very involved in student organizations and things. I was the president of a big student organization. Went to work for Ernst & Young right out of college. That year I was the only person that went to work for one of the big firms out of school. It was a small school, but I just say that to say, I thought I was doing all of the right things along the way. Stayed with Ernst for 5 years, and then went to work for HealthSouth Corporation, and spent many years there. But I get back to that night of December 6, 2005, of trying to go to sleep, and I wasn't laying in my own bed that night at home. I was actually on the top rack of a bunk bed at Maxwell Federal Prison Camp in Montgomery, Alabama. Looking at spending the next 2 years of my life there. So it gave me plenty of time to really reflect on, how on earth did I get to where I am today? What happened? What happened? How did this start? And you see this goofy picture of me here standing on a softball field next to a chalk line. And I kind of equate that to not just conduct in business, but basically conduct in life. When you're put in situations where either you are asked to do something that isn't right, or if you are put in a situation where it's just more comfortable to go along, or it's more comfortable to look the other way so that someone could do something that they probably shouldn't be doing. The first time you do that, you're stepping over that chalk line the first time. And you may do it, and you're very careful not to step upon the line itself, and then you very carefully step back and you get back on the right side of the line. In a business, you may be viewed as a good team player at that point, somebody that will do whatever it takes. But once you've done that the very first time, you've shown a real character flaw in that you're willing to compromise a certain amount of integrity and ethics to do whatever it takes. And then it's that much easier the second time to step across, and a third time, and a fourth time. And before you know it, where'd the chalk line go? What am I doing way out here in left field? In many ways, that's how I wound up in that bunk bed at Maxwell, was going back and forth over that line and winding up somewhere out in left field. We didn't just wake up one day at HealthSouth and go in and go, hey, let's go commit securities fraud. Imagine the fun that we'll have lying to the SEC. It really didn't start that way at all. HealthSouth was formed back in the early 80s. It was inspired really out of changes by the Medicare program, how they paid hospitals, and there was a huge incentive to move people through hospitals a little bit quicker and move them into less costly outpatient centers. So that was the idea of the company, was outpatient rehab. We moved into inpatient rehab, and like I say, the first ground-up hospital we did was here in Albuquerque. And then as the years went by, we moved into surgery centers and diagnostic centers. $4 billion company in revenues, and we were the largest provider of all these four areas that you see. I mean, each one was the largest provider of its kind in the country. So it was a great idea, great timing to do what we were doing. The chairman of the board, a guy named Richard Scrushy, it was his idea, HealthSouth it was his vision to start this. And he's a very, very dynamic, energetic, charismatic kind of guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy that could go to the North Pole and sell ice to an Eskimo. I mean, he was just that good, you know, very polished. And he could take a room like this, a group of people, and absolutely beat you up until you just, you know, couldn't see straight, but then build you back up where you wanted to charge out of the room, knock the doors down, and go conquer the world. I mean, he had that kind of ability. He was a heck of a leader, heck of a dynamic leader. But the problem with that is that same type of personality, that strong type A personality that can inspire and motivate and lead, can also be used for the opposite. It can be also used to make people or get people to go along and step over that chalk line and start doing things that they probably wouldn't otherwise do. And I'm not trying to come off as, well, you know, it's not my fault, it was Richard's fault, poor me. I mean, I made some really idiotic decisions along the way to have become involved in this fraud. And I'm not blaming Richard for it. I mean, I've got some Richard stories and different things. But please don't confuse those with me trying to distance my responsibility from it, because I'm responsible for where I wound up. But Richard was a heck of a motivator. We used to have Monday morning meetings every week, started at 6:30 in the morning. And early days of the company, it was just a small table, and we would sit around and you present your report of what you accomplished the previous week and what your goals were for the current week. And every week somebody was in the barrel. I mean, the big joke around the office was, well, whose day is it going to be in the barrel, to get beat up in there? Because he always had to humiliate somebody. It was very uncomfortable because, I mean, he really flogged people when he was mad about something. I mean, his eyes would turn black and he could just really dish it out. But you know, I mean, people put up with it. And we were a startup company. We were already publicly traded. Everybody under Excel spreadsheets is sitting there going, okay, here's what my stock options are worth today. I can take these beatings. You know, I'm gonna be successful with this thing. We're gonna make this thing work. But one particular Monday, Richard was a little disappointed where things were going, and he drew this picture of a wagon with little stick figures. And his challenge there was, where are you? You need to be out front pulling the wagon all the time. You need to be out front or maybe behind pushing, but you know, do not be sitting up on the hill just happy, just sitting there watching, and certainly you don't want to be riding in a wagon. And it really became the mantra for the company over the years, a strong mantra. When in subsequent years, we built a big corporate office in Birmingham, and he had an artist build this $100-some thousand stainless steel sculpture of the wagon with the people pulling the wagon. So you couldn't come and go from the corporate office without seeing this gigantic sculpture of people pulling the wagon. This picture itself was copied, and it was required that every HealthSouth location have that in the lobby of each location. And we actually had auditors who did another facility type of audit, and that was part of their checklist, was to go in and make sure that the pulling the wagon sign was in the lobby. Incidentally, Richard's portrait was required to be right next to the wagon also. Kind of get into some of the narcissism here in a second, but they had to check off if Richard's photograph was next to the wagon as well. You know, personalities don't change. You know, really who someone is at home is who they are in the boardroom, or who they are at work, in many ways, is who they are at home. You know, if someone has a very destructive personal lifestyle, then more than likely that's going to follow them to the office as well. I mean, you're really one and the same person. You can't just flip a switch when you come and go from work every day. I mean, the machine was about to start back up again of the lies, and at that point I realized, you know, enough. I'm just not going to sit back and watch this anymore. Contacted an attorney in Birmingham. He made calls to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a meeting was set up, a very secret meeting, of course, where I was told to, this is at the Galleria Shopping Center in Birmingham. It's a huge complex, big mall. I mean, the atrium alone is the size of a couple of football fields. But they told me to park behind the office tower on the right and take a serpentine route through the mall to make sure that I wasn't being followed. Because they understood, you know, the gravity of this situation. If Richard found out that one of his guys was about to blow the whistle on the thing, you know, who knows what he would do. It wouldn't be pretty. But I was told to go to room 405 after taking the serpentine route through the mall and ask for Tom Glavine, former pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. So I went up there and I knocked on the door and I asked for Tom Glavine, and he wasn't there. God, such a disappointment. But instead there was an FBI agent the size of that door over there, and 5 other federal agents, and for the next few hours I laid it out, just completely laid it out. And I didn't have a promise of immunity. I knew I was in trouble. I mean, I'd been involved in this fraud for years, and I knew I was in deep trouble, and knew my life, was about to change pretty drastically. But yeah, so I was scared. But I remember walking out that night like it was last night, and just that entire sense of relief of this boulder is off my back, and the lying and the deception and everything that goes along with it, was over. I'm going to accept the consequences of whatever happens, but it's time to start doing right. And it was a really lonely time for quite a while after that, trying to figure out what was going to happen. 10 days after I went in and talked to the agents, the FBI and others went in and raided the corporate office. I was actually in my attorney's office that night because I had a meeting with the judge the next day. So we sat there with the television going, watching live breaking news of HealthSouth Corporation being raided by the FBI. The TV trucks were out there, satellite, telephoto lenses looking in. You could see guys rolling filing cabinets around and everything. I mean, it was absolutely surreal. Just like this isn't happening, but it is. But it took the government close to 6 months to put their entire case together against Richard, and they finally charged him with 80-some counts of fraud. And he went to his arraignment in front of the judge and said he wasn't guilty, and started a PR campaign in Birmingham saying that, he didn't have any idea. It was these CFOs. They're the ones that deceived him and kept everything away from him. He then went to seminary school and became an ordained minister and began preaching, and he started giving literally millions of dollars to the inner city churches within Birmingham. Okay, the same target area that they would subsequently try to draw the jury pool from. All right, started giving millions of dollars to these inner city churches, and then he started preaching in the churches and carrying on. He paid the editor. There's really one main newspaper in Birmingham. Of course, that's saying a lot nowadays with the internet, even have one newspaper. But there's one main newspaper. Then there was another small newspaper, kind of an inner city newspaper. He paid the editor of that $50,000 just to write favorable articles about him while all this is developing, because he's trying to rehab his image. He's trying to make a name for himself. Then he bought a television station in Birmingham, an over-the-air television station, and started doing Christian, I hate to use that word with him, but I shouldn't have said that, sorry. He started doing Christian programming over the air on his TV station, and began preaching on Sunday mornings, had a flock of people that would come out to the church. And again, this was a over-the-air television station. It was broadcasting to the economic group that a lot of them would be in inner city Birmingham, and would be likely watching that. And he also had a daily television show called Viewpoint. And he and his third wife, Leslie, would go on and just kind of talk about the topic of the day. This was the new Richard. In the 2 years leading up to the trial, that's what he did. Is he became this new televangelist and began preaching to kind of show a different side to him. The trial itself finally took place. It took about 6 months for the trial to go on. Like I said, I came forward 2 years before that and pled guilty to the charges against me. And the government made a decision to not allow my sentencing to go forward while they were waiting on the Scrushy trial. And their thought was, well, we want to keep this hook over Weston to make sure that he testifies in the trial, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if I'm willing to blow the whistle and, say goodbye to everything, why am I going to suddenly cave and not testify against Richard? So the defense really used that against the government, because I'd be on the stand and Richard's attorneys would say, well, Weston, you're going to go to jail, aren't you? Yeah, I think so. Well, you're here testifying against Richard. You're making up the stuff against Richard, so you'll get a lighter sentence, aren't you? No. You don't want a lighter sentence? Yeah. Well, you just said you don't want a lighter sentence. You're lying to this jury today, aren't you? So it was the entire, they used all that to basically say, I'm lying about Richard, so I'll get a reduced sentence. You're just making all this stuff up. And they did this with really all the witnesses that testified against Richard. Dug up skeletons from their personal closet and everything else to just basically discredit everything that was said. While the trial was taking place, of course, the jury was not sequestered, and there were press conferences on the courthouse steps every afternoon. And let's not be naive. Jurors are instructed not to pay attention to the news, but come on, 6-month trial, the trial of the century, they're down home watching this. And Richard's TV show at night began a new series called The Trial of Richard Scrushy, and had former Jason Hervey employees who gave kind of like a CNN type of setup discussing what was going on in the courtroom every day. And I watched it enough times to realize that I don't think they're watching the same trial that I was in. What they were discussing and what was going on were two vastly different things. But basically all that was rebuttal for months before the prosecution could present their case. It was just basically, I got that backwards, defense comes second. They were doing rebuttal that entire time that the prosecution was presenting their case to continue to taint the jury pool. What happened? Found not guilty on all charges. Multi-billion-dollar fraud. 5 CFOs involved in this fraud, other people involved, and at the end of the day, the jury acquitted him on all charges. And they came back later and said, well, things like if the glove don't fit, you don't convict, and there's no smoking gun. And the defense put forth an argument saying, well, you didn't give us a single email of Richard instructing you to commit fraud. Well, think about it. If somebody's going to tell you to do something illegal, are they going to send you an email and say, fraud meeting this afternoon, 2 o'clock, come up with ideas to come up with $30 million worth of fraudulent earnings? Of course not. It's all discussed behind closed doors. But the prosecution in discussions I've had since then have come back and said, well, they basically put on a DNA type of case. And they told the jury that there's not a smoking gun, there's not a memo, there's not fingerprints. You guys don't have anything that you can lay your hands on other than the lies that these CFOs put in front of you, so you have to acquit the guy. And they bought it. They went along with it. That's kind of the HealthSouth story. But it's not just about HealthSouth, the type of fraud that goes on. And this was a very big fraud. But I hate to say it, but there's a lot of things still going on out there. You can't read the Wall Street Journal for more than a couple of days without seeing somebody, doing something. Red flags that should have been big red flags for HealthSouth are a lot of the one-time charges. Limited transparency, constant moving around of our numbers on the financial statements, over disclosure in some areas versus under disclosure in others, always changing gears, frequent changes in executive management. Like I said, I was the 4th CFO out of 5 while the fraud took place. It was a revolving door in that office, and all the CFOs were promoted from within. So what does that tell you when executive management always has to come from within? Why couldn't we find a talented person from the outside world to come in? Huge red flag right there. But again, extreme personalities. Richard was a very extreme personality, but if you look at WorldCom or Tyco or some of these other big frauds, and not just the big frauds, but if you read the local paper, and you start looking at the lifestyles of some people who've been involved in these types of crimes, you see a lot of similar traits right there. You know, a bigger than life ego, where they're going to do absolutely whatever it takes to get what they want. I was at New Mexico State University yesterday, and a guy came up after discussion, and he said, "Well, you know, Weston, I mean, isn't it good? I mean, aren't we supposed to be type A personalities in business? I mean, competition is tough. Business is real. I mean, aren't we supposed to be that way?" And I said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, business is pressure-packed, especially with a publicly traded company. The pressure is unbelievable. It's off the charts, what you have to commit to and the pressure to meet those results." But what I said to this guy was, okay, well, you've got to draw a line, and basically you've got to do what it takes to be competitive, but not do whatever it takes to be competitive and get ahead. And there's a big difference between the two. You know, like the softball players that got paid off to win, you know, we were doing whatever it took to get ahead and to make the company, quote, successful, but not doing what it took. And HealthSouth's a great company. I mean, there's still a hospital right just a few miles from here. You know, if it wasn't a good idea or a valid company, they wouldn't be here today. They're still in existence today, and they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Much smaller company than it was before, but I'm glad they made it. I mean, it's a real company. But you know, what is the toll? I mean, obviously, investors lost a lot of money, but there were a lot of innocent people, you know, that lost their jobs because of the things that I was and other people were involved in. And my message to you is, you may be looking at me thinking, well, I'd never do what you were doing. That's ridiculous. I'd never get involved in something like this. Well, there were a lot of people at HealthSouth that maybe looked the other way, or really didn't have any idea what was going on. But they certainly saw the extravagance and everything else that was taking place in a really corrosive corporate culture. And when the whole thing blew up, you know, they lost their jobs, they lost savings, you know, families were affected, people lost their houses. And I'm talking about the innocent people here, not the people that deserved to lose all those things, like me. I'm talking about the innocent folks. So, I mean, my message to you is, it's not enough just to look the other way if you feel like something is not right. You know, an ethical person is going to really evaluate, okay, is there something going on, and do I need to just be looking the other way, or do I need to be getting the heck out of Dodge? You know, or doing something about it if need be. But, you know, just looking the other way isn't good enough. You know, this really isn't just an accounting story either. I mean, just a few months ago, you know the story about the Costa Concordia that hit the rocks off the coast of Italy because the captain of the ship intentionally took the ship off course. And Carnival came out with this outlandish comment about, we're going to evaluate our emergency response procedures. This tragedy has called that into question. Well, no duh. I mean, come on. You know, where were their procedures the previous two times this captain took the ship off course? This wasn't the first time they did this. You know, he was a cowboy. He had the same traits that I've been talking about for the past hour of, you know, a bigger-than-life personality, a huge ego. I mean, the ship was taking on water, and he's upstairs with his girlfriend demanding his dinner. Where's my food? And then when it was obvious that the ship was going to sink, who's the first person on the life raft? He is. He jumped off the ship and got in a life raft. Wouldn't take ownership of the situation. That's not an accounting story at all. And 30 people lost their lives as a result of it. You know, where were the ethical boundaries for that captain? And how many other Carnival captains have that same personality that are putting people's lives in danger? You know, I talked about a multi-billion-dollar fraud, and I'm talking about a ship. But there's a million things in between, you know, that can affect people very personally if you go along or you look the other way, or you just tolerate it, or you're not diligent and follow some very fundamental ethical beliefs. You know, I want to close by telling you a story about a guy named Charles Blondin, referred to as the Great Blondin. And back in the 1800s, he would walk across Niagara Falls on a tight wire. And this guy was a heck of a showman. I mean, he really knew how to work up a crowd and everything to get them really into the spectacle of it all. And before he would go across, he would say things like, "Do you believe that the Great Blondin can walk blindfolded across Niagara Falls?" And the people would scream, "We believe!" And there he'd go, off across Niagara Falls blindfolded. And then he'd come back and he'd say something like, "Do you believe that the Great Blondin can walk blindfolded and backwards across Niagara Falls?" And everybody go, "We believe!" They're getting excited. And he'd go do it. This guy was so good that one time he actually put an iron stove onto a wheelbarrow and walked across Niagara Falls to the center and cooked an omelet while standing on a tight wire and dropped it down to the people in a boat down below. I mean, you can imagine what the crowd was doing at that point. "Do you believe I can cook an omelet? Good grief." Well, the climax of the show is he would get back and he would say, "Do you believe that the Great Blondin can carry a man across Niagara Falls?" And everybody would scream out, "We believe!" Who's first? You know, silence. Silence at that point. Well, guess what? I always believed that I would never get caught up in something like this. You know, I thought I did everything right. I thought I had my ethical boundaries laid out there, you know. But the first time this big ethical dilemma came along, either small or not, I cratered. I didn't do it. And, you know, a lot of students in here, I mean, I hate to say this, but in a lot of situations, it's not a question of if you're going to be confronted with an ethical dilemma, it's a question of when. And will you believe enough in yourself when you've got a car note, or you've got a mortgage, or you've got a husband or wife at home, or a sick child? It took you 6 months to get that job. This is a great job. You want to be a team player and move with it. There's going to be a lot of pressure there, you know. And that's when you really have to dig deep and ask yourself if you believe in yourself enough to say no.
Taken an ethics class, and we had a case on HealthSouth, and we had the privilege of actually having a former CFO come here and talk to us and give us an experience of what he went through the chaotic times, and kind of teach us some valuable things that we've learned here in grad school. Probably my favorite part is the lesson that when we learned that it's not a matter of if you're going to be in this circumstance, but a matter of when and how are you going to deal with it. So I thought that was very valuable.
I think Mr. Smith was very explicit on the kinds of personalities that take part in these kinds of activities, and it's really good, all the red flags that he mentioned, that we'll all know looking forward to our future bosses what things could put it at risk.
So much more insightful and educational when you hear from somebody that has actually been through it. So it was great and very entertaining, and I recommend it to anybody, even beyond business school.
I talked a lot today about my experiences at HealthSouth and the things that I did and how I compromised my character and ethics to climb the ladder and to become rich at HealthSouth and do all those types of things. You know, I wound up serving time and basically losing all the money and assets that I had. But let me tell you, I mean, it's much better being broke and honest than living a rich lie. So don't ever fall into the trap of thinking, you know, I'm going to do this, I want to be successful. There's plenty of ways to be successful. There's plenty of ways to do well in your career and move forward and get all the things that you want and do your very best. But you've always just got to do it right. You've got to stay focused on doing it right.